The drive to dominate North America and basically the Western Hemisphere is going to lead to England, France, and Spain, the three major powers in North America, to engage in a massive war, which we are later going to call the French and Indian War. And it's called the French and Indian War because the British won the war. So it's their war against the French and their Indian allies. But in truth, what it really is the British and Indian versus the French and Indian and the Spanish and Indians. That makes sense at all. We'll see, first of all, is the lead up to the big war. There's actually some preliminary wars over the decades that are going to lead to it. It's not just one simple spark and it begins a war. There are many different conflicts between the French and the British especially. Then we'll see the first shot heard round the world, and then the colonies' response to the French and Indian War as reflected in the Albany Congress. We'll then see the Braddock debacle and the British gaining the advantage at last, and how and why they were able to gain the advantage. And then finally, the Treaty of Paris in 1763. But first, a nice little song for you, just like I did at the beginning of this course. It's called The Ballad of Lucy Locket, and basically it is a song sung about a hapless prostitute. She lost her pocket, which means she lost her virginity. Kitty Fisher found it, and there was no money for it, just only ribbon around it. But this is how it goes. Listen carefully, right? Lucy Locket lost her pocket, Kitty Fisher found it. Not a penny was there in it, only ribbon round it. Obviously, you now know the basis of Yankee Doodle is a song about prostitutes. So our national anthem is based on a song about drinking, and basically the song of the Revolution is one that's based on prostitution. Now here is a young and up-and-coming fellow, if ever there was one. 22-year-old George Washington, even at this young age, already had a strong sense of himself. A member of the Tidewater elite, he had built himself a grand home by this point at Mount Vernon, down the Potomac River, from where the city that bears his name would eventually be located. This was built on the backs of slaves. He had two ambitions in his life. One, to be considered a master tobacco planter, and two, to be an army officer. He wanted a commission in the regular British Army. He did not receive that, but he was made a colonel in the Virginia Colonial Militia. And he saw himself as a soldier, and he had a very strong ethic about how a soldier should conduct himself. And the baseline ethic of a soldier is to be that of a gentleman. And we'll get into that a little bit later during the Revolutionary War. But he is a loyal subject of the British Crown at this time and a member of the colony of Virginia. He's not part of the first families of Virginia. He's actually a later member of the Virginia elites, but nonetheless, he is a strong personality among the Virginia elites. In leading up to the big war, as I said, there were many other little wars that took place over the decades. They were always about Indian questions. This was the biggest issue. The French and the Hurons had an alliance. The British and the Iroquois and the Creeks had an alliance. And the Franco-Huron alliance hindered westward expansion, and it harassed the British colonists because the British colonists are always looking to get over the Appalachians into the Ohio Valley, which was claimed by the French and the Hurons. Well, the first of these preliminary wars is called King William's War. It's named after King William of Orange, who, with his wife Mary, deposed Mary's father, James II, during the Glorious Revolution of 1688. This King William's War took place in New England and New York, and it highlighted the growing role that colonial militias, as disorganized as they were becoming more and more organized. After King William and Queen Mary died, Mary's sister Anne, good Queen Anne as she is known, then takes the throne, and there's a war named for her. This takes place in both the northern and the southern colonies. It was a vicious war, after which both sides decided that they were going to fight more in a gentlemanly fashion. And a gentlemanly fashion means that you may kill, but only in the heat of battle. You cannot kill the wounded. You cannot burn villages. You must act appropriately toward the vanquished and the defeated. What you see in Queen Anne's War is a first attempt at colonial cooperation. But wars cost money, in case you didn't know. And if you haven't been listening to current events lately, we've had a war that's cost about $100 billion. So you have to tax. There's a drastic rise in colonial taxation. But Queen Anne's War does remove the French threat from eastern Canada. The Third War takes place in 1740 during the reign of George II. There's George I, and then his son George II, and then his grandson will be George III. This Third War is France and Spain and the growing influence of a country in Central Europe called Prussia, which is the heart of Germany today, and Great Britain and Austria on the other side. What this is seen by many on the British side is a Protestant crusade against Catholicism in North America. Nova Scotia was attacked and captured by British colonists. However, in the resulting peace treaty, they did give it back to the French, but you're waiting for the big war to take place. Before there was the Revolutionary War, there was the French and Indian War. Without the French and Indian War, you don't have an American Revolutionary War. Thus, it's called the first shot heard around the world. And it literally is a global war in the sense that it takes place all over the globe, on the North America, South America, the high seas, and in Europe. It begins when Robert Dinwiddie, the deputy colonial governor of Virginia, decides that the lands in Virginia are not enough, and therefore you need to move into the Ohio Valley and claim it so that there can be more land. So he grants land in the Ohio Valley, and he sends Lieutenant Colonel George Washington, a tobacco planter, a surveyor, and a soldier, to the Ohio Valley. It is there that the Battle of Jumonville Glen takes place, when the Virginia colonists, the militia, accidentally fire on a French column. Washington then has to build very quickly a fort, which he names Fort Necessity, and he then surrenders it. The date on which Washington surrendered Fort Necessity, July the 4th, 1755. This now ignites the Indian tribes against each other as well. The Hurons, of course, have a long-standing alliance with the French, the Iroquois with the British, the Creek with the British, and the Cherokee, which are going to be a MO for the Cherokee throughout their existence. They're going to play both sides against the other. And all this because the leader of a French peace delegation was killed in an ambush outside of Jumonville Glen. It reflected Washington's inexperience. Although he did not give the order to kill, he did not have good enough discipline on his men. And thus begins the 7 Years' War in Europe, which is actually 9 years long in North America, 1754 to 1763. The colonists and the leaders of the colony are very well aware that this war is largely for their benefit. Nonetheless, they appeal to Westminster for aid. This is your job as the imperial parliament, to come to our defense. We will defend ourselves, but we need your help as well. But at the same time, they realized that separate and apart from each other, the colonies will not be able to execute this war properly. So they form a plan. Representatives from 7 colonies, Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and New Jersey, all meet on the Hudson River at the town of Albany, New York. And there they begin to formulate a plan of union. This is not an idea of coming together as a country. This is more sort of a semi-confederation where they will join together for mutual defense. The Albany Plan of Union is the brainchild of 2 men. One, Benjamin Franklin, now in his 40s, a retired man of leisure, getting into the scientific pursuits and so forth, and Thomas Hutchinson, the lieutenant governor of Massachusetts. Their plan is simple: appoint a president to deal with Indian relations, military affairs, and trade. And then they would establish a grand council based on taxes so that they could tax the colonies. They present this proposal to the Westminster Parliament. George II rejects it, and Parliament does also. The colonial legislatures also reject it. They say they're not quite ready to give up this much of their sovereignty. It shows the fierce determination to protect the individual liberties in the colonies. But they do come up with a flag, the snake, which will be used several times more during the Revolution. With the war now beginning in earnest, the British send one of their great commanders, Major General Edward Braddock. The name Braddock is actually an Irish name, and he would be called Anglo-Irish. That is, he was English, but he was born in Ireland. He's a very good general, and many of Britain's great generals are what you call Anglo-Irish. For instance, the Duke of Wellington, and later on Edward Pakenham, who was famous at the Battle of New Orleans and so forth. It is here that the battle for Fort Duquesne takes place. Fort Duquesne is located at the junction of the Monongahela and the Allegheny Rivers. We call that the confluence, where they form the Ohio River. It is here in the battle for Fort Duquesne that the French are victorious and Braddock is mortally wounded. It's followed again by the Battle of the Monongahela. The British are later defeated and surrendered under the command of Braddock's second in command, George Washington. For the second time in his military career, George Washington loses a battle. George Washington loses more battles than he wins, but he wins the most important battle at the end. Despite Washington's surrender, he was well recommended by the French for his gallantry and well treated and sent back to Virginia. And the reports from other soldiers say that Washington held himself to an incredibly high standard and would not let his men lose morale or anything, and was able to secure for them safe passage back home. So his reputation rises. He's one of the few people that can actually suffer a defeat and gain his reputation even better. On the right, you see a diorama of what Fort Duquesne would have looked like right at the tip of the confluence of the Monongahela and the Allegheny Rivers. Of course, there's big high-rise skyscrapers and so forth there now today of downtown Pittsburgh. On the left, you see the map of where Fort Duquesne would have been located in relation to the Great Lakes and where the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers came from the north and the south together. And of course, the other forts that the French had, Presqu'Île-les-Boeufs, which of course means the bull, and Fort Machault. What you see here is a museum recreation of what Fort Necessity would have looked like and why it was very easy for Washington to have to surrender it, because it just was very hastily put up. But nonetheless, it was good for the time, and this is what the cannon would have looked like that Washington had at his disposal. The early years of the French and Indian War are not good for the British. The British are not doing well. They're losing battles, and it appears as if the French are going to get the upper hand. And there's a great deal of debate in Parliament. And up steps William Pitt, who's known as William Pitt the Elder. He will have a son later as William Pitt the Younger. And Pitt says that if you're going to fight a war, then God damn it, you got to fight it to win it. And therefore, you have to finance the war. He commits the entire British treasury to the war. We're going to win this war. We're going to go all the way. He sends 24,000 soldiers to North America. Those soldiers need to be paid. They need to be clothed. They need to be equipped. That costs money. I'm going to raise another 25,000 colonial troops, and they're going to help equip them as well. And with this in mind, the British now turn the tide in 1759. By 1760, the British have reversed their fortunes and cleared the Ohio Valley of French troops. And then they go for Canada and its great city of Quebec, which is on an island in the middle of the St. Lawrence River on heights. And there, General James Wolfe, yet another Anglo-Irish commander, wins the battle of the Plains of Abraham right outside of Quebec. Wolfe is killed in the battle, heroically leading his troops in the charge. But when Quebec and Montreal then fall to the British, it is over for the French in Canada. They're going to lose their entire North American empire. Here you see the map of the French and Indian War and the various battles that took place along the St. Lawrence and in the colonies, in the backcountry, along the Ohio River and so forth. Nova Scotia, Louisburg, of course, near the tip of Nova Scotia. And you see there in the light tan, next to Nova Scotia, Acadia. This is a massive defeat for the French. They're going to be completely pushed out of North America. They're going to lose all of their possessions, with the exception of a few islands down in the Caribbean. England has won this war. The bells in the towns of the eastern seaboard on the Atlantic are ringing joyously. Benjamin Franklin said, "Today it is a great day to be a part of the British Empire." Colonial patriotism toward Britain is at an all-time high. The treaty that is signed in Paris in 1763 is a triumph for the British. It's a humiliation for the French. I've already said they've lost their entire North American empire. Now I drew your attention on the map to Acadia, Acadie, as it was known to the French. There you had a very strong Catholic farming community, rural community, very, very devout in its Catholicism. When Britain takes over in Canada and in Acadia, they impose an oath of loyalty to the king. Now, taking an oath of loyalty to the king as your sovereign ruler is, you might have to swallow it, but you can do it. The problem is that the King of England is not just the King of England, he's head of the Church of England. The Acadians are Catholic. Their allegiance religiously is to the Pope. They are unable to take it, many of them. And for this, they are ethnically cleansed. They are forced to move out of Canada. And they don't really have any place to go until finally the Spanish, who, by the way, also lost the French and Indian War. They lost Florida, but they maintained Louisiana because the French transferred Louisiana over to Spain near the end of the war. The Spanish invited the Acadians to come in and settle and create essentially a rural farming economy for Louisiana. It saved the colony. And this is how we get the Cajuns. The colonists in the English colonies are overjoyed. They believe that the Trans-Appalachia, the area over the Appalachian Mountains, are now going to be open to settlement. There will be no further French or Indian threats to their security or prosperity. all seems to be fantastic. In 1770, the artist Benjamin West painted the death of General Wolfe, as you see there, as his soldiers and even the Indians look on mournfully. This now hangs in the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa. Britain now is the master of almost all of North America. They control the entire Atlantic. They control the Ohio Valley. A weak Spain is in charge in Louisiana, and they have lost their colony of Florida. France only has Haiti and a few little islands in the Caribbean, and that's it. Now, what does this mean? It means that Britain is victorious and France is humiliated. And the French don't do very well with humiliation. They're humiliated often, as we'll find out over the next few centuries, but they do tend to come back from it. And the French are going to plan their revenge, as will the Spanish. They're going to plan their chance to get back at the British. But right now, Britain is on top and ruling things, and the colonists believe that this is the beginning of a grand new age for British North America.